YPF, as the short acronym goes. And my main role within the municipality relates to the Water Services Development Plan, the Water Master Plan, and my key KPI is the Drought Mitigation Plan. So I've been asked to put together a presentation for you, and let me get that shared. Avagila, I'd just like to confirm that you can just see it in full screen before I get started.
Yes, sir. We can see your presentation. It's in full screen. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm just going to stop sharing my camera for bandwidth limitations. I do live quite a little bit out of Port Elizabeth, so you forgive me there. But welcome. Thank you for those who made time out of your day to be a part of this event and to learn just a little bit about what the NMBM is doing to tackle our day zero. I will be providing a lot of context. For me as an engineer, it's imperative to first understand the problem before one focuses on this was the solution that was implemented. I'll be providing background on what we've done to improve our water supply. I'll be doing a background on what we've done to ensure what we do generate we use more efficiently. But without giving away too much, let me get cracking on the presentation of today. So let's first look at where the NMBM is. We've had a lot of news and coverage about our day zero, very similar to that the City of Cape Town had. We've worked with the City of Cape Town extensively to sort of compare our different situations. And the more we collaborate together, the more we realize it's unique. And one of the main reasons is where we're situated. So this, for you who are not local, this is the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality. Our area is shown in the dark black line with the green internal color. It comprises mainly of the city of Gqeberha, previously PE, now GQ, and Dispatch and Uitenhage, now known as Kariga. So we've gone through a name-changing phase recently for our towns. It's got a population of about 1.32 million individuals that we service, an area of about 200,000 hectares. And what's really interesting about the NMBM is when you look at this map, the reason I've included all our neighboring local municipalities and the neighboring towns is because most of the water supply for this municipality does not come from within our borders. In fact, a minuscule amount only does. So when I look at South Africa, and I love this map because to me, water is the lifeblood of our country. You can think of it as sort of like the little veins and arteries that keep the wheels turning within our economy, within our social spaces, within our environment. And we just, as water engineers, form one small part of this great being that is our river systems. Now, looking at PE in particular, we are located near the tail of the Swartkops River, so between Sundays and Gamtoos at the bottom of the screen there. And our water sources mainly, especially our surface water sources, are located to our west. Those are the catchments that we sort of really tap into, the Krom being an important one as well. And what's interesting about PE in particular is it's not just our local water sources that we into. One of our largest supplies is the Orange River system. So this is water that falls within the Lesotho Highlands mainly, also going a bit more to the northeastern areas towards the Free State, the tailpipes of the Gauteng region, and the Northern Province in particular. So when I look at our little municipality, it's not just the nearby sources of water that we tap into. We have access to quite a large portion of the river systems within the country. And the largest supply scheme that we have is called the Orange Fish Transfer Scheme. This is an absolute engineering marvel. I'm still awed by it. The fact that water that falls 630 kilometers away in Lesotho travels all the way down the Gariep into the Gariep Dam and part of the Orange system. And then there's a tunnel from Overston all the way down to Teerbootsspruit, and then it goes into the Great Fish River. There's a tunnel that then brings it across into the Little Fish River, some canals, some more tunnels, some more transport infrastructure, all the way down to the Sundays River, and eventually into an irrigation boards canal just north of our metro where we abstracted, near the town of Kirkwood. So the fact that my residents and myself too, when I open my tap, that water has taken a 634-kilometer journey all the way through the country just to reach my tap is something that's truly impressive. And at a global stage, South Africa is well known for its interbasin transfer schemes. And this is one of our flagship projects throughout the country. The other is the Lesotho water that goes north to the Gauteng region. And why the Gariep Dam is significant to the NMBM is, and here's a beautiful photo of it when it was spilling recently, is just simply its sheer capacity. If you take all the dam capacities of all what I consider our local dams and put them together, they would only fill a 20th of this dam. Its capacity is just stupendous in terms of the volumes we normally deal with. And it was the foresight of the engineers of the past to say, right, we have an excess of water here. How can we bring it to developed regions that don't have great local water supplies? So let's talk about the sort of water supply system on a bulk level for the metro. So we've talked at length about the Orange Fish Sunday scheme, and it's at our Neugerach water treatment works, which has also been in the news quite a lot, that about 70% of our water comes into the city during a drought period. The rest of the sources we consider local. So the first is our sand and bulk river dams. These are old dams dating back to the 1930s. They were the first large supply dams to the city. We then have the Grondal Dam, which is just north of Kariga, and its main supply. We then have the Krom system, which includes our Churchill and Mpofu dams. Those are the largest, that's the largest supply scheme that's dedicated to the NMBM. And then we have the Kocha-Luri system. The Kocha is the largest dam within our region, but we share that water with the Gamtoos Irrigation Board, a conglomerate of farmers to the west of the NMBM. We do have access to a spring just north of the town of Kariga. It's actually why the town developed in the first place. It's quite a reliable spring, but its volume's minuscule in comparison to the rest. And most recently, one of my primary projects has been to diversify us into additional groundwater as being part of the supply to the system. So this is at a very high level what it looks like. It's a tremendously interconnected system. So the focal point that I put in was to try and be able to supply areas with multiple sources of water, should one be stressed, we could get from elsewhere. And I will elaborate more on that in this presentation. So let's focus in on the local dams. These are their capacities. You can see the ones on the right that we own are our small older dams. And most importantly, you can see our biggest by far, the Kocha and Mpofu dams, make up most of the storage for our zone. In fact, that makes up 81% of the storage in our supply system. So it's those two dams that when we talk levels and capacities that you really must keep an eye on because they play a huge part in the resilience of our system. Let's see some photos. So we're very lucky at the NMBM. We purchase a drone as survey equipment, and I get the joy of flying it every now and then because I believe a picture tells so much more words than a graph with a line across it. So this was Kocha Dam towards the end of 2021. In fact, this got down to 4% in capacity. It was incredible. We haven't seen those levels, especially in the short duration history I've been at the Metro. The Luri Dam downstream is just a balancing dam, but to see the intake tower exposed was something new for us as well. It offered an opportunity for maintenance, which was great. The Grondal Dam is a little bit harder to access. I took this in 2020. In fact, in March this year, the Grondal Dam reached its lowest ever level since it was constructed in the late 40s. It went down to 14%. Of all the droughts we've been through, Grondal was hit the hardest it's ever been hit before. This is the Churchill Dam. It's a multi-span arch dam. Beautiful, beautiful place to go. Also was severely stressed. In fact, this dam did run dry. It reached its dead storage of 7% and was off for about a 5-month period before it started to recover. And the one that we try and make the most awareness about is the Mpofu Dam. And that is because this is, as I said, the largest supply dam dedicated to the NMBM. An interesting part of this photo is it's an earth dam, and you can see the riprap, the stones on the inside of the dam wall. And we hadn't seen below the riprap line. You can see at the water's edge, there's no longer any riprap. We hadn't seen that since this dam was constructed in 1983. It was quite awe-inspiring to stand there and see. You can see where the dead vegetation is. That's what it would look like full. If almost this whole picture would be water, but that's all that was left in at the time of this photo. Right, so we've got some context. Let's talk about some figures. We're engineers after all. So the NMBM experiences cyclical droughts at a local scale, on average about every 7 years. We are unfortunately at sort of the tail end of the cold fronts that make Cape Town's dams fill up, and we kind of get the dead pieces of the thunderstorms that fill up the dams to our east, especially in the KZN region in the Midlands. So we don't have a reliable, this is our rainy period. We actually get rain throughout the year, and some years we just get less than others. So the worst drought we had on record was before all of these was in the late 80s, and that was before we had water from the Gariep Dam. So it was due to the drought in the late 80s that they brought water from the Gariep Dam. We built Nooigedag Phase 1, and that helped us for a number of years with resilience. But as sort of demand increased, level of service increased, especially in the 2000s, the early 2010s, we started getting more and more dips in the supply system as it wasn't being able to keep up with that growth in demand. And what's unique about this drought is, although we anticipated a drought and we were storing up for it and trying to plan for it, the sheer duration of this drought has been unprecedented. If I look at zooming in on dam levels as an average capacity, the dams were last full here in November 2015. That is 8 years ago. It's absolutely unprecedented, and no amount of reasonable planning or investment could have foreseen this event at looking back in time. So you can see on this graph, as the dam levels went down, we started imposing restrictions. We had some relief in August 2018, but then since then we had a gradual decline, and basically we were just about managing it for a 3-year period between 20 and 10%. You can also see on this graph that of recent, the last 3 to 4 months, we are very fortunate to have had good rainfall again. Our average dam levels at the end of August were at 48%. We're not out of the woods yet, as they say, but let's just say my stress levels are inversely proportional to the dam levels. So I am in a chipper mood the last few months, and very thankful for the rain that we've received. So if I look in terms of quantities, remembering dead storage, of course, that the non-accessible part of the dam, we're currently at an available storage of 43%. At the bottom of this picture, you can see that our lowest capacity was 9.98. And when you take into account dead storage of 5.4, that meant I actually only had 4.5% volume left in my dams that were accessible. That's how serious the drought got for us. That's how little sleep and extra effort had to be put in just to balance this thing on a knife edge and hope beyond hope that we did not fail. So we came very close to it, but it's looking a lot more positive moving forward. So let's move forward. What are the predictions, going into the future? So I rely on the South African Weather Service. They release a monthly report which shows the indications of what sort of rainfall you can expect over the next 5-month period. Looking at this, it's showing no clear signal. Our dam areas are in white, but in general over the country as a whole, up until December, we're expecting above average rainfall, which is fantastic. Moving into the summer period, January and beyond, that message will change, as you can see at the bottom right figure, and we'll start moving into a below average rainfall period. So during this period, we're doing all we can to take less from the dam so that they can recover as quickly as possible for the next dry spell. And when it comes to rainfall, intermittent rain that makes the grass green in PE is not the rain that creates the runoff that actually contributes to increasing a dam level. We've been saying for a while in Babeja that we're currently having a wet drought because the gardens are looking beautiful, the road grass is growing, but it's within our catchment areas. You can see them drawn here. I did it on Earth just to show that, when it rains in PE, I don't get excited, but when it rains in Jubatina or Carriedo or Harlem, that side of the country for us, that's when I start getting excited because that's where our catchment areas for the dams are. And we really need an event where we kind of get 50 mils or more in 24 hours to saturate the ground before it can absorb everything, create that runoff that then gets caught in the dams. And moving even further forward, moving in January, February, March next year, our concern is that a La Nina event is predicted. And once that kicks into place, the impact on the Southern African weather system is a below average rainfall period. So, the focus must be on preparing for this next low rainfall event and making it through that as well. So, like I said, feeling happier, but foot is definitely not off the gas just yet. Again, let's go even more technical. This is the audience I'm presenting to. Let's talk in volume. So how it works is, as a municipality, we purchase a water license from the Department of Water and Sanitation. We make a request saying this is the volume we need. They look at the resource, what it can produce, what's already committed to other users, and then they decide whether or not we can buy that water use license. And what DWS does is, in a time of drought, to protect the resource, they limit the amount of volume that you can take from it that you normally have a license for. So say, for example, the CROM system, which is Churchill and Pofu at the bottom left. Normally, my license says I'm allowed 100 million liters a day out of that system. But during this drought and the current restrictions imposed, 70% of that is taken away. I now know and am only able to take 30 million liters. And that creates a 70 million liter deficit in my system that I must subsidize from elsewhere, or I must get my consumers to use less because there's less available. Looking at the restrictions moving forward, they've relaxed dramatically over our Sandbalt-Krundal region, where they were also quite strict at the stage. But basically, the net is only half the water I can get from my local dams I'm allowed to take moving forward. Here's sort of the volumes we're looking at. It's looking much more positive than it did. At a stage, DWS were restricting me to 280 million liters a day. I'm now up to 324, which is much more manageable. I've also brought groundwater online. You can see 18 megs a day initially under our licenses, so that's looking positive. But what I had to plan for was this. Before groundwater came on, what if Churchill and Pofu and Kocha failed because they were ever so near to that happening? I would only have 224 million liters a day I could take from the system, and that would by far exceed the demand. So how were we going to address that? If you look at demand for the NMBM region from 2011 onwards, you can see pre-drought towards the end of 2015, our summer peak demand was almost 340 million liters a day, a stark contrast to the numbers I talked about just previously. And when the drought kicked in, we brought on the restrictions. People had that shock and that wow factor, very much like Cape Town, causing that panic and causing a reaction. And we managed to bring it down during one winter period to 250 megs a day. But what we've noticed is an extended drought causes almost a fatigue amongst the populace. People get tired of hearing the same message and having to make the same sacrifices. So over time, that demand slowly started recovering, not to its pre-drought levels, but hovering between the sort of 290, 300 million liters a day. And through all other interventions, it's been very difficult. In fact, if I look retrospectively, this is perhaps where we haven't done well as the NMBM and citizens as a whole is use less during the drought, use it more efficiently. I'll talk a bit more about that just now. The demand is an engineering term, and so much of our job is especially municipal engineers, is about getting that message out to the public and getting it into a format that can be consumed and understood. So here's a simple barometric reading. In early August, we were still limited to what we could take out, and we targeted 230 megs a day. But with all the schemes I've recently brought online, we've diversified, we're feeling more confident, we've set the target at 280 megs a day, and that's what we as a city should be hitting to make sure that we can be more resilient moving forward. And the consequence of not doing that is certain regions, especially those supplied in red, that rely on the local dams, could face a no water scenario. And I don't mean no water for a few days. If those local sources failed, we would have a deficit, and it would be weeks, months, an immeasurable time period until the climate changed and recovered those dams. And this was seen as the biggest disaster. Much of my focus went into how can we avoid that? And if it happens, what do we do? What do we do? I mean, how do you have a city function socially and economically if that actually became eventuality? So let's get into my realm and my work besides the communication that I do. This is my bread and butter. It's our drought mitigation plan. I roughly review it once a year based on new ideas and progress on projects especially. It's on our municipal website. You could download it anytime and review it. Feel free to get in contact and comment and give ideas. We really have expanded our network because we've realized that we can learn from everybody a new viewpoint, a new perspective, or a new technology that could help make the difference in our city. So let's talk about the two main points of departure from this plan. What I did is I split it into two core components. I split it into supply interventions, get more water, and I split it into demand conservation efforts to use water more efficiently and not waste it. On the supply side, the first thing I looked at was, well, if the local dams do run dry, can we still get some of the dead storage out of it? And this was one of those projects. So you can see Mpofu Dam to the left is basically running dry. It was at about 7%. The intake tower, the foundations were exposed. So there's no way the intake tower is going to contribute to the water supply system. So what we did is we quickly built together a floating platform or a barge, pumps, motors, a transformer for power systems, some electronic controls, and we basically floated that out deeper and deeper down towards the dam wall to suck water, dead storage out of this system and put it in the intake tower. This helped us dramatically. It did mean that we were tapping into dead storage, which would hamper the ability to recover, but some water in terms of constitutional human rights is better than nothing. So we had no choice. This was one of our interventions. The other core focus was the Gariep dam system. Now, the Gariep was full. It had plenty of capacity. How can we bring more of that water into areas traditionally supplied by the local dams to offset that water usage, right? So we first looked at upgrading the water treatment works, starting at the top, phase 3. So that's bringing on additional capacity. And while that was happening, we built a temporary treatment works, which I'll show you next, so that we could have capacity while that was under construction and then decommission once we handed over to phase 3. But it's no good just producing more water. You can produce all the water you want at the works. If you can't move it to a tap, it's just going to overflow at the works. So the transfer system, the booster pump stations and the new pump station in green were all about taking that water to the taps and creating the demand from that treatment works, interconnecting pipe work to other zones as well, and expanding those zones became critical to this additional supply from the Gariep Dam. So this is Grassridge. We won an award for this. We were very proud. It's a reservoir. So what we did is we converted it into a settling tank, essentially. Raw water came in. We reconfigured the pumps at Neugedacht for one set to pump raw water. Comes in at the right-hand side there in green. It goes through a mixer with a sheet of plastic to sort of separate that zone, and it's dosed with its flocculant and coagulant, creating this mix, hopefully for good flock development. And as it flows along the long direction towards the end of the reservoir where the outlet is, you can imagine looking at it from side on, all the heavy particles will slowly settle down towards the bottom along that length. So the outlet we reconfigured not to suck from the bottom, from the top where the clear water would be. We added some chlorine, and that's how we brought a temporary water treatment works online. We then upgraded the Neugedacht treatment works. So each phase is 70 million liters a day. Phase 3 was constructed, so that brought us up to 210, and then we could decommission grassroots. So you 70% of the water supply to the city coming from this facility alone. Here's just one or two photos. So it's strainer, mixer, settling tank, and filters, chemical dosing, and we have backwash recovery, settling, backwash recovery, and then the large high lift and low lift pump stations to then move that water into the city. See, unlike Cape Town, where most of its dams and treatment works are in the mountains, so they've got gravity basically to bring into their network, the NMBM is rather flat. So a lot of our water supply is through pump schemes to get it into large bulk reservoirs and into the network. Moving further down the Neugedacht transfer scheme, I'm currently underway with upgrading of the Motherwell booster pump station by adding an additional pump set. I'm also currently upgrading Stanford Road pump station. Those two are due to end in November this year, and this will help bring even more water from Neugedacht across to the southern and western region. Then a new pump station had to be constructed called the KwaNobuhle Supply Pump Station, and this is the final step in getting that water over the watershed to those stressed areas. There's some interconnecting pipework that was also constructed. I see one of my colleagues, Lyle, has joined the meeting. This was one of his projects. So to get areas that relied on the local dams on this transfer scheme as well, such as KwaNobuhle. The third important element of our supply system augmentation was groundwater. So I'm quite passionate about groundwater, and anyone who knows me knows this about me. What I see the value in it is if you have those resources within your zone, you can diversify your water mix. During periods of dry, you can tap into these more and rely on them. And during periods of plenty, perhaps you could even recharge them with excess dam water and build up those aquifers again. So I will talk about more of the details of what we did on the groundwater schemes when I get to St. George's. But in a nutshell, you can see on this screen there were 6 areas really of interest highlighted in yellow that we took forward into implementation. We drilled about 208 boreholes throughout the metro and in our border regions where our dams were at Churchill, looking for these aquifers. Basically, explore first, see what you find. Okay, how can we integrate this into the system? And groundwater, it's never where you want it. That's something you're going to learn. You know, at a house, when a driller comes, he drills in the driveway because that's where his drill rig can access. When you're looking at water for a municipal scale, you have to look at the geology, you have to look at the hydrogeology, and you have to look where there would be large volumes of water. We're not talking little 200 mil holes at a house here. I mean, one of the drill rigs was drilling 600 mil diameters. I mean, it's a different scale when you come to municipal groundwater infrastructure. So let's have a look at them. This is Kuchopop. This is one of the prides and joys. We've been on been in the IMESA magazine as the cover photo for that. That was a nice highlight for us. We also were on Morning Live during Water Week. We had a live handover and about a 45-minute tour of the plant. The water that comes to this plant is artesian, so it comes out the ground on its own. It's full of iron and manganese, and we're using a breakthrough technology where we're using bacteria to act as a catalyst to help us remove those minerals. And interesting enough, the water comes out at about 27 degrees C, so it's quite warm. We actually have to let it run through the plant to cool down before we put it into the system. The second is the Bushy Park wellfield. This gives about 10 megs a day, and we inject this water into the same pipeline that comes from the local dam. So every liter we put in here is one less we take from the local dams themselves. We then have three smaller ones called the Moorgrove wellfields. They comprise of Fairview, Port Nottingham, and Glendinning, combined about 5 million liters a day. They only supplement reservoirs. So we actually blend the water. It's not 100% SANS compliant, very, very close. But when it's blended at a ratio of 20% groundwater to 80% surface water, we are well within tolerance. So we abstract, disinfect, put it in the reservoir, and again, it's another liter less from the dams. The last big groundwater project, and the one that we're really here for today to discuss, is the St. George's Park wellfield. This is just a teaser slide. I've got a section on that, and we'll go through some of the really cool engineering problems that we had encountered and how we solved them a little later. So, you take a break. I hope I still have your interest and you're still being attentive. It wouldn't be an NMBM drought presentation if I didn't also focus on the second focal point of our drought plan, which is water conservation and water demand management. It's where we get the most critique, the most public feedback, and the most ideas as well. So I'm going to give you a very quick and high-level overview of some of the key measures we've been undertaking. But make no mistake, this is not everything. This is just some of the bigger stuff that we've been focusing on. We do have a 15 workstream focal plan to improve our non-revenue water, or decrease it perhaps is the better word. Remember, non-revenue water is just the difference between what comes out of your treatment works and what's billed to your consumers. It could be lost through leaks. It could be simply unbilled, or the meter could have stopped reading, or it could be illegal connections. There are many things that could cause that difference. You know, real losses, apparent losses, or unbilled consumption. So when you hear a non-revenue water figure, just know it's more related to the billing system than how much water is lost. I mean, think about it. If water losses are quoted at 30%, every third street I would drive down in our city, I should see water running down the road. It's just not simply true. A lot of it relates to how much is actually being measured at the consumer. And if we focused on fixing that, our value would decrease. But I digress. Let's focus on what we did. A huge drive for leak repairs. We are repairing about 1,200 leaks a week. It is immense. And to understand the scale of what we're dealing with, I love this. I put this together a while ago. If you take all the pipelines, if you look at South Africa as a whole, and you look at our perimeter, our borders, essentially, with the ocean, with our neighbors, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Eswatini, the total perimeter amounts to about 6,700 kilometers. It's a huge area. I mean, you know, our military and our navy struggle to manage those borders. And in comparison, if you take all the water pipelines throughout the NMBM and you lay them end to end, bulk distribution lines, all of them, they would go 80% around this perimeter. How incredible is that? That is the scale of infrastructure we're dealing with. So, you know, when you have 4 depots with a few plumbers each and a couple contractors with their teams, this is the scale of the infrastructure that you're dealing with when it comes to water pipelines, just for a little municipality. And we are by far not the largest. So understanding the scale is very important when it comes to understanding response times and available resources to reduce the backlog in leaks. Another intervention is we're doing district metered areas, GMAs as well, where basically, for example, the water going into a suburb, how much went into the suburb, how much was billed in the suburb, which suburb has the biggest difference. Let's focus our efforts there to find out where that missing water is going. And we're doing that also remotely. So those signals are, those flow rates and pressures are being sent to us to our head office so we can interrogate them and pick up anomalies, especially night flow, which is an indication of wasted water. We also reduce the pressure. tremendously down to 1.5 bar in critical zones. This was one of the great initiatives done by City of Cape Town. Less pressure means when you run your tap, less water comes out is one, so less wastage. But two, when you have leaks, there's less loss due to a leak because there's less pressure to force it through that leak. So 89 pressure management areas currently, and that list is just growing and growing and growing. When we have abuse at a household level, we can then look at installing our flow limiting meters and our flow limiting discs. So like a flow limiting meter will let a certain volume through it from 5 a.m. And if you hit that limit, it will stop water supply until 5 a.m. the next day when it starts up again. We don't set them very tightly. We set them to avoid abuse. If a property is using more than 500 liters a day, it is excessive. And how you can measure yourself to that is you look how many people in your household. So if you're a household of 4 and our target is 50 liters per person per day, over the course of a month, your municipal bill should read 6 kiloliters. If you're above that, you're a problem. If you're below that, you're part of the solution. And we're trying to give the public measurable ways to see, are they on track? And if not, give them advice of what they can do to get themselves on target. So there's a lot of campaigning. We've targeted the schools, especially the churches as well, to get, there's nothing better than your kid telling you, stop using water, you're wasting, mommy. So we've tried to bring this into social culture in a way. And on our website and also our Go FM and our local radio stations, every day the dam levels are quoted. This is updated daily so you can see exactly how we're performing, and there are measurable things you can use to say, are we there? In this case, we're 10 megs a day over target. We're not there. We need to do more. And a lot of the communication side has been, I can't force someone to do something, but I can show them the consequences of not doing anything. So if we didn't do anything, this could become our reality. And that was well received. It did actually bring it into the public context. What if it did happen, though? What do we do? I mean, we'd installed tanks on platforms throughout the city that we could fill up with water trucks. But I mean, how practical really is that for a whole community to go to these collection points? I mean, some areas where we couldn't do that, there would have to be a mobile truck sitting and waiting while people collect. And there are only so many water trucks throughout a city that could be made available and service so many individuals. We had tried the concept of water collection points where essentially we would shut off the supply to a suburb, but just before that shut-off valve, we would establish a collection point where people could come and collect. So it would literally be the water that you could carry is what you could use, very much like a standpipe system. So taking off reticulation to the household and moving on to a centralized standpipe collection system. But these were last resorts, and I don't think any person would be happy with this sort of level of service as a standard for a metro. So we had to prepare, but we didn't want this to become a reality. And now I think I've given you context. Remember, we're in engineering. What's the first step? Is to define the problem. I think I've given you enough information and background to understand it. The problem is we relied on local surface water sources and they experienced a low rainfall period for an extended period of time. So what were the solutions? A lot of them to you have been shown. St. George's Park Wellfield is just one of those, but we need to go into detail into one of them, and this is the one that sparked a lot of interest. So this is the one I'm going to show you today. To give a bit of background to this project, this didn't start as a knee-jerk reaction to the drought. We've been looking into groundwater since 2004 when the Water Research Commission and us worked together to looking at what potential there would be in the NMBM and surrounds. It was brought into our reconciliation strategy in 2008, and during our minor drought of the 2010s, we really actually commenced with work on some of those sites, looking into what the potential would be. So when it came to these augmentation schemes, Kuchel we started in 2012 with our exploration. In 2018, I received a special grant of 97 million, called a municipal disaster grant, to explore these other areas, one of them being St. George's. I recognized that as a metro, we had very little experience with groundwater. So I chose 7 public pools, sports fields, stadiums, etc., to be our pilot projects, taking them off the drinking water system and putting them onto groundwater or non-potable water, so that we could learn what control systems would we need, what structures would be best suited. And we did different ones at each of these 7 to learn from it, so that when it came time to investing in this multi-million rand infrastructure. I mean, Kuchel Corp itself is 450 million rand. We would know what we were doing, or at least have some experience on what we were doing. So really during 2020 and 2021, that's when things heated up. We got the funding to go ahead with the construction of the treatment works, pump stations, and general borehole equipping infrastructure required. St. George's Park in particular commenced with construction in July 2021 with an approximate value of 55 million for construction. So here's the groundwater plans phase 1. These well fields to be brought online. You'll see, thankfully, a lot of them are in the southern and western zone, which is fantastic, because that's exactly where I needed the water, and they would then augment these local sources. You'll see, though, number 4 and number 3 are kind of along a line, and they are. They're along one of the fault lines called the Moorgrove fault line. The Kugelkop is along the Groot-Winterhoek fault zone. That's an awesome fault. It's artesian. And Bushy Park has its own fault system that runs through that farm. But we're going to focus on the Moorgrove fault. So this is kind of the Moorgrove fault. It's not a straight line. A fracture in the rock is never a straight line. So it kind of runs within this area indicated on the map. You can see we have a number of reservoirs within that zone. So those were the 3 smaller ones I did for Nottingham, Fairview, and Glendinning. You can see we had the Newton Park pool. So that was a great test of infrastructure for the Moorgrove fault. You can also see between Newton Park and Malabar, there's a quarry there, and that's important. And then on the bottom right, you can see the St. George's borehole. So they all fall on the same fault line. This is the fault. Here I am in the quarry. And I don't know how many of you can spot it, but can you see the vertical fracture in the rock? There it is. Okay. So how you see the fracture is not just the vertical gravel-like material created by 2 major rock surfaces rubbing together. If you look along the horizontal plane, you can also see horizontal cracks. And where they cross the blue line, you can see that the one line is lower than the other. I'll highlight those for you there. That is the fault system. The NMBM city center area is a lot lower than our southern and western zone. That is because of this fault. It subsided on the hanging wall. The hanging walls towards our CBD area, and the footwall stayed firm. So a whole section geologically sunk. And it's at this interface that we really look for large groundwater resources, because rock is it's like a sponge. Imagine 2 sponges, a soft sponge and a really, really dense sponge. If you put them in water and put a straw in them and try and suck, if you try and suck out the really dense sponge, it's hard to get the water out and it doesn't hold much water. But the soft sponge is much easier to suck the water out and it holds a lot. It's at these interfaces that you have a lower density and you have more transmissivity to be able to move that water through those cracks. That's what we were targeting. We were looking, where are the major fault lines throughout the city, be they folding faults or be they slip faults or normal faults like this. That's where our high groundwater resources were targeted. So let's focus back into St. George's. So we know we're on the Moorgrove fault. So what are we going to do with this water? I have a reservoir in St. George's Park, nicely named St. George's Park Reservoir. It's the 2nd oldest reservoir in the city. It was built in 1907. It is a heritage site. There's war memorials on top of it and a little garden that you can see as well. So it's a protected piece of infrastructure. It can hold about 9 million liters a day. And the demand for the zone it supplies, which is kind of our Hume Rail, South End, Humewood, a little bit of the CBD area, is about 2 million liters a day. That's the piece of water infrastructure that I wanted to try and augment onto groundwater. So first thing you do is you drill, and you know you're in a fault zone, so you should find good water. But how much could we find? That's step one. And some of the bigger boreholes that we drilled there blew at 28 liters a second. That's serious water. 28 liters a second is lekker. The biggest borehole water strike I've had in the metro is 76 liters a second. But this, for the area that we're supplying, that only needs 2 megs, strikes like these got us really excited. Let's just put it that way. So this is St. George's Park. You can see towards the top, you can see the circular reservoir. To the bottom right, you can see St. George's Cricket Grounds, the tennis courts nearby, the bowling greens, the parks department. There's quite a lot going on within this park. The dots in yellow show where I explored, my exploration drilling. And we drilled 9 holes in total to find out what the potential of this resource was. 4 of them we turned into production holes, so we just reamed them slightly bigger so we could get a nice big pump in it. When you drill boreholes, drill a small hole first and see what you find. Look at the rock coming out. Every meter, take a sample, build a sample garden so you can see the rocks. You can see if there's a change in interface. You can see if there's staining on the rocks. If the rock is stained, it means that minerals have flowed past it and deposited oxides or other minerals on top of it. And that's an indication of groundwater. So explore first, then go, okay, where the good strikes are, drill them out bigger so that you can put the equipment you need in to get that water out. The exploration holes we drill are typically about 200 meters in this sort of area. Our production boreholes were 310 meters plus. Not our deepest, but in order to get to the large aquifer, we had to go down about 300 meters here. Okay, so we've drilled them, we've tested them over a long period of time to work out a sustainable flow rate. We've done water quality testing, so we know what to expect and what we need to treat. What do we do from there? So step one, we need to build the equipment to get the water out of the ground and convey it towards a centralized point. Step two, we need to build an appropriate treatment process if there are minerals that need to be removed and also disinfection that needs to take place. We then need to discharge it into the point of supply so that we create a demand for the system. Otherwise, again, the treatment works will overflow.
Matthew, you are muted.
Thank you. Someone must have muted me. So the next point was, if we have excess groundwater supply, more than the reservoir needs, let's use a pump station to bring that into the bulk Churchill pipeline, supplying further reservoirs downstream. So that would maximize the resource as much as possible. And that was the overall plan when we put together the tender document for construction. So construction went underway, July 2021. Here we are building the pipelines and chambers. The chambers are prefabricated. They're actually precast walls, basically. And I used 2 C channels welded together to create the posts, and they slot in. What that does, obviously, is construction's a lot faster. But secondly, if I ever need to dismantle this chamber to perform work on it, very easy, prefabricated, just like those prefabricated walls you get protecting infrastructure. Another thing we chose to do is the borehole itself is in its own chamber. And the equipment for the mechanical controls and sensors are in the large rectangular chamber. So if I ever need to work on the ball again and blow it out or repair it, I'm not going to flood my equipment. Separate the two. That is very important. And we learned that from the pilot projects. The treatment work side, we needed to build a filtration system. So this water had a little bit of metals in, a bit of iron, not much, a bit of copper, bits and bobs. that needed to be oxidized out. And the reason why we had to oxidize them out was this resource was going to be the sole supply for the reservoir. So there was no blending. If you were slightly out of spec, you could just blend with surface water. This was going to be a sole supply system. So it was imperative that we were SANS 241 compliant 100% 24/7. So you can see in these photos the foundation being laid and the mastic asphalt going down to help them set level. You can see bottom left, the larger structure is just a stilling chamber. That's giving time for the oxidation reaction. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the three big sand filters. They are automatic gravity-based backwash sand filters. So no mechanical components. It works on vortices created when you have too much back pressure through the filter. And we did that because we didn't have a lot of extra teams that we could use to run these systems. It had to be as automated and simple as possible. That was our target. In order to create the oxidizing reaction, just before these filters, we inject a little bit of chlorine that oxidizes the minerals so that they become precipitated and can get caught in the sand media filter. And then after the filters, we dose a little bit more chlorine for disinfection and residual disinfection purposes. So this is us building the chlorine dosing room. So this is quite a tall structure because you have to reverse a lorry into it with 1-ton cylinders of gas. There was a lot of debate, do we go gas? This is an urban area. There are other technologies like OSEC in particular, but due to our operational limitations, we chose chlorine. Chlorine we're very familiar with. We have a supply chain set up for it. We have people who can install it safely and who are qualified. One of the advices I can give you working in government is know your resources. There is no point building a Mercedes treatment works if you don't have the people and the skills to run it. If you are in the middle of the Karoo and you have very limited personnel and you're trying to do a wastewater treatment works, do sludge lagoons, do sludge ponds and oxidizing ponds. Don't do a full CAS system. The expertise on the electrical, electronic, and mechanical equipment aren't there. So for this reason, we chose chlorine gas, and a huge amount of effort was made into ensuring that it was safe. A sealed building that automatically seals, a diffuser that if one of the 4 sensors picks up gas, will pump all that A through a neutralizing media and keep the thing safe. Backup power supply and UPSs. You can go gas in town. You just have to be very attentive to detail when it comes to making sure it's safe. And then the other major component was the pump station. So this is any excess water that's created, not used by the zone, can go to other zones. And here we are building it. 2 pumps. Always when you build a pump station, leave an extra bay. One day you may need a 3rd pump. You're only going to build the structure once, so always leave an extra plinth spare for future expansion. On the left, you can see us drilling through the 1907 wall of the dam for our suction line there on the left. On the bottom of it, that's just so that we can go lower without sucking in air into the pump station. And then the last piece of construction was probably the most complicated, was where this pump station tied into the existing bulk line. It was in our CBD area, lots of existing services, but through careful planning and project management, we made it to go without a hitch or damaging anything, and you wouldn't even know the structures there driving past it today. So let's look at some final photos. Here we are. This is the chlorine dosing room. I chose the brick myself to sort of match the surrounding area and try and fit in with the existing infrastructure. You can also see our transformer on the outside and all the security measures we had to go in place. Being the CBD, there is a theft and vandalism issue. Full camera system, clear view fence, the works here. It's built like Fort Knox. That's the chlorine scrubber I mentioned, for if there is any gas detected, all air is put through that media. And there's the pump station upon its completion. You just look at the structure. I mean, some of the things I went through to prevent theft and vandalism. It's a double wall with a cavity. That cavity is full of concrete. So if they start removing bricks trying to get through, they're just going to hit a concrete slab, basically. The roof is solid concrete, no gutters because they climb up that. Rather have a large apron and just manage your stormwater runoff onto the apron. The doors are basically from a safe. The ventilation was made narrow, so it's hard for someone to climb through, and it's cast into that concrete between the cavity. Nothing really within arm's reach. And then after this, cameras went on at a high level as well. So, know your area. Design not for the technical solution now. Design for the 20 or 30 years that this thing will have to be there and operated. So an operator-centric approach to design is one of the best advices I can give you as a consulting engineer. Be operator-centric. Imagine you had to run this thing for 30 years. How are you going to protect it, and how are you going to make life simple? So a massive success. We launched on the 14th of March. We've been running this plant since the 1st of March, averaging about 2.6 megs a day. We're just, we don't want to stress the aquifer at this stage, and we're trying to get the news out of all these positive projects. So we have some more positive press than negative press. And then lastly, I'll summarize because I think I'm hitting my time limit. I was given an hour, which was quite some time to fill. So thanks for being patient with me. In summary, a drought is a collective issue. It has many stakeholders and role players, but even myself as a municipal engineer, I live here. I have a vested interest as a member of the public to do something to make sure my tap will run tomorrow and make sure my neighbor's tap will run tomorrow. So we're trying to educate our councillors and politicians as well as our general public, like, these are your areas, this is how your ward's performing, and these are the wards that could improve, for example. There's a new media campaign going out projecting those images and saying, hey, these wards aren't behaving and these wards are. Do something to get your name on or off each of those lists. And in the public campaign, a lot of the little things you can do to make a difference, because it doesn't require much of a difference to be made. If we use 10 to 15% less water, which is not a huge volume, or just have a quicker shower, then we wouldn't have a demand exceeding supply scenario. So this has been a huge campaign, is to realize that we need to work together to avoid this dry tap scenario. It's not just a municipal problem, it's a public problem as well. And only when those two connect and are on the same page will you actually effectively get yourself through a disaster. So thank you for your patience and your time and the opportunity to present to all of you. I think it's time to hand back to our coordinator to facilitate questions.
All right, awesome. No, thank you so much, Matthew. That was a brilliant, brilliant presentation. I knew you wouldn't disappoint. Very, very insightful, and yeah, very thought-provoking, actually. While you were presenting, you've also got me personally, thinking about my projects, as I'm also in the water and sanitation space. So as you know from previous experience, so it's really, really great. And for those of us working in the consulting space, working with other water service authorities and water service providers, we can definitely learn a thing or two from what the NMBM is doing, which you have also done through your interventions, with your partnership with the City of Cape Town. So really, really brilliant, and keep up the good work, Matthew. We do support the initiatives that the NMBM is doing. So thank you for that, and all the best. I now want to open the floor up for any questions, comments. So I will go through by a show of hands. I'm not sure, Matthew, if you'd be comfortable if we take a series of questions or you'd answer one at a time. Okay, you muted there.
Sorry, let's just do a series of questions to
Okay.
answer in one collective answer.
All right, no, 100%. I think then I'll open the floor. By show of hands then, I think we'll just go according to the order, and then we'll just take it from there. I see Deboko's question. Deboko's got his hand up. If no one else has got their hand up, I think then Tebogo, you can go ahead. Mr. Francis, I see your hand is up as well. So we'll go Tebogo, then we'll go through to Mr. Francis. So Tebogo, you can go ahead, you can unmute.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. My question is centered around the water conservation and water demand management. I see that we are focusing a lot on extracting the water resources from wherever is it that we can, and we are doing our best to make sure that we meet the demands of the city. But then in light of there being a drought in the city, it means that there's not really a lot that we can do about it, but there is a high non-revenue water in the NMD municipality. So what I want to know is, in terms of resource allocation, the amount of effort that you're putting in extracting water from different resources, in terms of dealing with the non-revenue water, what is the split of resources that you're putting in? Because according to the Water Research Institute, the NMB has got a 48.6% non-revenue water, of which 31.8% of that can be attributed to unaccounted for water, which is could be leaks or illegal connections. So in terms of you having a number that is a 31.8% and you tapping into new resources, what is the split between you combating the water that you are treating, distributing, and then just losing back into the ground again, compared to the amount of resources that you are tapping into in order to get more water from wherever it is that you can? Yeah, and that's it.
All right, thank you, Tebogo. Mr. Lau, Francis, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I know I could ask you this question if I just walked across from my office to yours, but I would just like to know, in terms of groundwater, maybe for the benefit of everyone else in the meeting, what is the long-term effect on the groundwater? I know places like within India where there's been over abstraction. What are the studies that we've done to ensure that we don't over abstract those resources and then, yeah, make the aquifer unyieldable, if that's a word? That is my question. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other hands? I'm just checking. Oh, okay. There's one from Sisipo Makila. You can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Matthew. Groundwater almost seems like the first of its kind when it comes to the NNBM. Do we have any lessons learned? How could we have done it better? Yeah, just lessons learned from my side. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Sisipo. Mr. Ngosi Emmanuel, you can go ahead.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, first and foremost. Yeah, I'm not in the water space, but I'm in the electricity space. You know, I always look at, you know, the way water is distributed, and I'm always wondering, you know, you know, what happened in PE, for example, with these droughts. I think we should. This is my view. I don't know. Maybe Matthew will speak to it more. But is it possible maybe to think of transmission pipelines in between cities? Distribution pipelines in that space. Is it something that can be done or not? Interconnecting. For example, I'm based in Mosobe. While the drought was hitting PE so badly, we were still enjoying our water, even because Mosobe has really done so well in terms of ensuring that they have water, but I think that's because they've also faced the same crisis some times back, and they ensure that they have, for example, desalination plants in place. They have very good encashment, places as well that actually where I think even in dry periods we still have water. So that's maybe something that I've thought about, and then the other thing also, maybe through your studies, I saw you really spoke a lot on your water encashment areas. What are some of, maybe ways you guys have done in terms of optimizing, the encashment areas, for example, to get more water as opposed to maybe natural encashment areas? I don't know. That's just, I'll listen in the background. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Matthew, are you fine with these questions, or can you take one more?
Let's have one more, and then I think it's time to start answering some of them.
All right. I think then I have one as well. One thing that I've done a little bit of research in the past, and I've noticed that some of your some of the larger metropoli like your Sydneys and your Melbournes have adopted using stormwater runoff as a measure that can be used as a short-term solution in especially when you've got high rainfall within your city areas. Do you think is this that maybe doing stormwater catchments? I know NMBM has quite a number of retention or detention ponds within the city. Is it possibly is that something that the NMBM can look at as a measure to try and curb or to reduce the full-on reliance on the groundwater or the surface water sources from the dams? Yeah, so is that something that that can be implemented or is being thought of from your department as an option, or do you think that that is possibly not viable at this stage yet for for the NMBM? Thanks.
No, thanks for well, firstly, thanks for the great questions. Very thought-provoking, each of them in their own different way. So I'll work through them a bit systematically, but I'll turn it more into a discussion because this is where we're entering the realm of discussion. Let's start with the very first question from Tebogo around water conservation, water demand management. Perhaps let me just share a screen again. So Tebogo, I'm not sure if you were around for the entire presentation, but there was quite a large section where I showed water conservation, water demand management, and the initiatives we're taking. And one of the things I tried to get across as part of the presentation was what is non-revenue water? I think, it's so easy to look at those percentages and go, oh, you're performing badly, you're performing well. And one immediately associates that performance with wastage. Okay, you see a high percentage and you think, hey, all this water is just being lost, leaked, it's unacceptable. That's not what non-revenue water is. Non-revenue water, in its simplest definition, is the difference between what comes out of the system, so what comes from our treatment works, you'll see it on the left as system input volume, and then what the difference between that and what is actually billed at the consumer. Okay, so we have about 230,000 water meters throughout the NMBM, okay, that are on the billing system, okay? But perhaps maybe one or two, or maybe even 1,000 of you have been missed and aren't being read or being estimated. So a recon on our water meters is a step to take. Second, perhaps the water meter is old and not reading accurately. The older they get, the less they underread more and more. So we've just agreed to an investment of 208 million over the next 10 months to do a dramatic meter replacement program. And part of that will be not just at the consumer, but also at the zones, your GMAs and DMAs, so that we can see what's going into these suburbs and see which ones to tackle first. But I concur with you, some of non-revenue water are losses through leaks or overflows or, illegal connections of that nature. Now, the second figure you quoted on NRW 48, yes, the difference in the billing system and the water treatment works. The second you quoted was what's apparently our water losses. Now, water losses measure 31 at the metro at the moment. It's a calculation done based on your NRW figure. There's no way to measure that accurately. You can't work out exactly how much is being lost because some of it could just be unbilled consumption, the area in green on this diagram. So how I put it into context was, if it really was that bad, 30% of your water going missing, every third street you drove down would have a water leak. It is not that bad. I feel that our percentages are poor due to a failure of our meter reading and billing systems, more so than the actual experience on the ground. And repairing 1,200 leaks a week shows how much of an effort we're making on just one of those 15 work streams. The second part of your question was resources. That's quite interesting because it's actually the supply side that has the least resources. On the water planning and research side, well, basically, it's just me. So a lot of our engineers in the government space have left the country to Canada, New Zealand, and the UK of recent. And these projects that I showed you on the supply side, they were my responsibility up until their completion. So on the NRW side, there are a lot more resources. Remember, that's an operating side. So in operational teams and maintenance teams will always have more funding. But the context of the problem was just how big that problem is. And if you remember this slide, when I showed that if you laid our pipes end to end, 80% of the perimeter of this country. So although there is so many more resources on our NRW, the problem is extremely large. And I think that's the best way I can try and give context and answer your question. To Lyle, the question was sustainability. Imperative for me before we even got off the ground was working out what flow rates can we sustainably extract so that we won't impact this resource negatively. Remember, this is not just a scheme that's going to get us through a year or two for a drought period. This is part of the permanent water supply system to the NMBM. This will make up our water mix for the next 20 or 30 years moving forward at current estimates of, equipment, refurbishment, etc. And how we do that is not only having production holes, so the four at St. George's are an example where we have constant level monitoring data and we analyze over time, is that holding stable or is it dropping? We also, those other 5 holes that weren't production, we make what we call monitoring holes. And within those, we also have level monitoring data. And then nearby users like the cricket ground, the parks, as well as the hospital, we also have probes in their holes to see if our abstraction is impacting them. And then on a yearly basis, at 6 months at first, but yearly thereafter, we gather all this data. It's all going into a SCADA system. It's all being logged to SQL. We then export that and analyze it, and we can make operational adjustments. So how these pumps work is I have basically 3 settings. I can set them into flow control mode where I target a flow rate determined with our geohydrologist. I can set a set point, so hold this water level above the pump and reduce your flow if it starts dropping or increase if it increases, or I can set a speed. And basically what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to look at a flow set point that we constantly review and adjust. And that's one of the ways in which we're going to understand how well we're impacting the resource and if we need to make any operational adjustments. And then bringing that information into our central SCADA system, which is my pet project on the side, to basically bring all our operational works, reservoirs, and pump stations, all their control and information to one centralized point which is monitored by a 24/7 operational team. And from there, we can manage the system. This is also on my phone, by the way. So in the morning, first thing I do is how's the system operating? What do we need to change? So that's sustainability. You prove it through data and through constant analysis, and you adjust accordingly. To Sisipo on lessons learned, just for background for everyone, that's probably the most appropriate question from Sisipo. She's taken over most of the operation of these, the well fields in particular. So what have I learned? What I do in my contracts is I have, towards the end, just before practical completion, I have what's called a trial operating period. It's basically a 30-day period where the contractor must successfully run the works and it must prove itself to be reliable and achieve the targets that were set for it. Okay. We did the 30 days TOP, but I felt like we could have had more of the operational teams available and there to learn more full time, if you will, to get a better handover than simply, here's the manuals in a few days showing you around. So in future, I would make having the NMBM operating teams essential to the trial operation 30-day period. And secondly, I've also recognized that groundwater systems are quite complicated when it comes to mechanical, electrical, electronic, especially electronic. There's a lot of sensors and stuff to ensure water quality and abstraction. I would probably build in a 6-month period after completion certificate where the contractor, not through a defects liability period, but through a set value per month, would be on standby to assist as the operation becomes the full responsibility of the NMBM. So better training before handover of our staff, or more resources available to train, and a 6-month period where you have that standby call for help should you encounter something new. That's what I've taken away from it. To Nkosi, transmission pipelines and interconnected cities, these work brilliantly in like Israel, where they have large cities not far away from us themselves on the coast. So you can have a huge desal plant and it supplies multiple cities. South Africa is large. The distance between PE and East London is significant. The distance between PE and Mossel Bay even further. The sheer energy and electrical cost alone, besides the infrastructure to be built, makes it very impractical within our country. So we don't use pipelines to move water. We use the river themselves and connect them with tunnels and canals. That has been the South African strategy. And by using gravity, it's also a lot more energy effective. As we're moving into a greener economy, it's not just about meeting everyone's demands, it's about how we can do it sustainably. And for that reason, I don't think it's taken much hold on our country. The catchment management is one of our work streams in our drought plan you can download. We've done a lot of alien vegetation removal with one of the irrigation boards as our partners, but it wasn't really context for this presentation, so apologies I skipped that. But yes, the Cape Town proved that the cheapest way you can generate water is by removing your alien vegetation. That's the cheapest. It's so much cheaper to cut down alien vegetation than it is to build St. George's Park wellfield, for example, in terms of cost-benefit analysis. So it was in the plan and it is an actioned item. And then Avuyile, your last question really relates to what I call my long-term drought strategies, those that will bring resilience for future droughts, not ones that really we could have made a difference with in this drought. And they include stormwater, but mainly relate to wastewater reuse, both direct and indirect, as well as desalination, which we are pushing forward as a baseload to the city. So I think that would give more context and information. One of the biggest problems with stormwater is contamination. So, it's in the city with litter and oils and residues from roads, etc. So to take stormwater and make it clean and drinkable is not as simple as it may seem. That's why we build dams that also collect stormwater essentially, but in areas where there's not a lot of activity upstream, where it's pristine pristine landscape and vegetation, so that the water coming into the dam is clean and easy to treat already. Avuyile, thanks for letting me have such a long time to respond, but I really value the questions. Back to you.
All right, no, awesome. Thank you so much for the responses, Matthew. Again, very insightful, and thought-provoking as well. So, yeah, I do see that we are pressed for time. We actually are a bit out of time, but I'm not sure if there are any other questions or comments that people that our attendees want to ask. I see Tebucho's got his hand up again. I'm assuming that he wants to follow up on his original question. Mr. Tebucho, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you for that. I think Matthew might have misunderstood the energy of my question here, because where my question was based was the type of data that we have, and how can we use the data that we have in order to influence the decision makers of the municipality. Because in reality, the people that end up making the financial decisions that impact the projects that we implement are not necessarily engineers. So if we are here collecting all the data and then using that data to influence some form of decision. So looking at Matthew's presentation, I noticed that there is a water conservation and water demand management program that is running in the municipality at the moment. So, and I also saw a permanent ultrasonic flow meter there in a chamber there, which gave me an indication that there is continuous measurement of the bulk water systems of the city. And if that is the case, you are able to have continuous data that show the minimum night flows of each and every single supply point. So from that data, you can conclude that maybe subtracting the factories and other institutions that may be using water at night, but it is fairly reasonable for you to come up with an estimate of how much water that you're losing due to leaks simply by looking at a plot of how much water flows through a pipe when it is expected that nobody is using the water. I see there's even a graph there just above your flow meter there, and I don't know if I looking at it, there is a little bit of night flow there. So my question was centered around there. That should give you a value of how much water is going through the system, and that is attached to a financial value to that. And from that, looking at the amount that you're losing and knowing the financial impact that it has with the real data that you have, how do you then say that we can focus on trying to recover some of the water that we are losing through distribution systems, and while at the same time trying to tap into new water resources? I don't know if maybe you understand me differently now, Matthew.
Okay. No, thank you, Tebogo. Yeah, I'm not sure, Matthew, do you want to answer this Tebogo's question, or do you want us to go to Bulelwa?
Let's have the second question, Avu.
All right, no, 100%. Bulelwa, you can go ahead.
From my side, it's not much of a question per se. Thank you, Matthew, for this good presentation. But I just wanted to find out, is this document accessible?
All right, no, thank you for that question, Bulelwa. I think then, Matthew, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll answer in reverse this time. So All this information that I've projected and discussed is on our website. I've made it a personal drive of mine that this is out in the public space for those who want to know can. If you go to nelsonmandelabay.gov.za, you're greeted with this welcome page, and we've managed to make drought one of the 4 clickable icons there. It's their centerfold to get your attention. If you click on this drought button, you'll have to excuse my internet, it's not as quick as it should be. You'll find a lot of information and presentations about the drought, what we're doing, how we're progressing, where our risk areas are, what you can do, etc. And at the top here, you can click on these links to get daily dam levels, weather information, what are the latest water restrictions, there's my drought mitigation plan, saving tips, reporting leaks, a usage calculator, quality data. So this would be your information hub to know more about the NMBM's drought and what we're doing to try and resolve it. And then back to the first question, and Tebogo, thank you for taking the time to further elaborate on your query. It was a little difficult for me to understand exactly where you were pointing, and now I understand. So the data does 2 things. The first thing the data does is, because the numbers are poor, it makes people in the public space, and more importantly, the political space, aware that it's bad. And when something politically looks bad, it's great because it makes our council want to react to that bad publicity and that bad number. So that's the one element of it. Remember, never waste a good crisis, hey? If you have a crisis, you have people's attention. So if you have a vision to resolve it, you have their attention and support to go down that road. And I've made full use of that in trying to implement these schemes. And the second part of the data is the post-data analysis, which is what you're referring to with NRW. And yes, that is a work stream for us. So the difference between GMAs and metered consumption at households, the night flow data, all of these, what it's being done is it's being done to focus our efforts. So it's pointing us in directions. Which areas have high night flow? Boom, we have a campaign. We bring 40 plumbers into that area and we walk the streets trying to find out leaks, especially in the lower income areas. And we also have what's called an ATTP plumber system. So the NMBM works on an assistance to the poor system. So if a house earns less than 2 state pensions, they get free services up to a limit. And we offer free plumbers to come and repair leaking toilets, leaking taps, etc., because we recognize these people need help. And the benefit to the supply system is there's no wastage there. So there is a prolonged and focused attack strategy for reducing those figures. And I think if the drought mitigation plan on the website doesn't answer your question satisfactorily, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll happily discuss it further. Thank you, Chair. I hand back to you.
All right. No, thank you so much, Matthew. I do see that again. We are out of time. So what we will do, Matthew, you did say that you will share your contact details so that if anybody has got any other questions or maybe are facing similar issues within their region, maybe they can contact you. And then then you can just assist them with going forward with their interventions and their schemes. So I see that you've displayed your contact details. So I would suggest that you guys take down his details. He is available obviously when he's not busy trying to save the city from from day zero. But yeah, please do contact him, engage with him. He's more than willing to assist where he can. And yeah, definitely, I can definitely vouch for Matthew when I say that he would definitely assist. He will definitely assist you wherever he possibly can. Again, he's very passionate about the industry, and yeah, he will do the best that he can to assist you. So obviously, with that being said, then we are basically closing off. I'd like to thank everyone who took time out of their busy schedules to to be here with us and to go through this webinar. I hope that it has been insightful. I hope that it's been engaging, thought provoking. And it makes you aware of what what can be faced in your specific region and what can be done to prevent any drastic situation. Remember, water is life, and it is a human right, to for people to have access to water. So for those of you who are specifically in the water space, I do urge you, I do encourage you, I implore you, to act within the best interest, of the public, to ensure that everyone has got access to water. And everyone has got access to not only just water, but to clean water. So I do implore you guys to ensure that within your spaces. And with that being said, thank you very much. Thank you to our presenter, our guest speaker, Mr. Matthew Hills. We really appreciate the presentation, and going forward, it's definitely given us something to think about. We are truly thankful, for you sharing, your thoughts on this and taking us through the St. George's Wellfield. I know it's one of your golden projects, so I'm really proud that you were able to finish it, and and for it to come to fruition. So really awesome regarding that. So thank you to everyone. And yes, lastly, before I forget, yes, you will be receiving a certificate, your certificate regarding the your EXA, to claim your EXA points for those who are undergoing registration, and for those who are registered, we will be receiving a certificate in order for you to claim points for this webinar. So thank you very much. Take care, everyone, and all the best. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Avu.
Thanks, Avi.